Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to today's web seminar, Banking in the Cognitive Era, sponsored by IBM and hosted by American Banker. Before we get going, I'd like to mention that today's session is being recorded and you are in a listen-only mode. We will take questions at the end of the presentation as time allows, so feel free to type them in at any time on the left-hand side of your screen using the Q&A panel. Just type your question into that lower text box and hit submit. And the slides are available for download from the resource list button at the bottom center of your screen. And you will also receive information via email within about a week on how to access the recorded presentation. And feel free to maximize or minimize or move around any of the windows on your screen as needed. If you experience any technical difficulties, the best thing to do is refresh your browser window to reset your connection. But if you're still having trouble, you can send a technical chat through the Q&A window, and I'd be happy to assist you. And now, without further delay, let's get started with today's event, sponsored by IBM and hosted by American Banker. I would now like to turn things over to your moderator, Mike Sisk.
Thanks very much, Erin, and I would like to welcome the audience once again. We're grateful that you've chosen to share some of your day with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we'll honor that today with what I'm confident will be an enlightening 60 minutes or so of discussion. Once again, our talk today is Banking in the Cognitive Era. And my name is Michael Sisk. I'm a contributing editor at American Banker, and I've covered business and financial markets for about 20 years now. My articles have also appeared in Barron's, Crane's New York Business, Inc., Institutional Investor, Strategy and Business, and Worth. But more important, we have two excellent speakers with us today. Brian Walter, he is the Global Industry Leadership Partner, Banking and Financial Markets, Global Leader, Wealth Management in the IBM Watson Group, and Jonathan Young, Program Director, Watson Engagement Advisor, Marketing, IBM Watson Group. And we're very, very pleased to have both gentlemen with us today. We've got a lot of great content to get through. Before we jump into it, just wanted to reiterate, one or two things that Erin said at the top. We do have time at the end for Q&A, probably about 10 minutes worth. So please, you can put your questions in as they occur to you throughout the hour. You don't have to wait until the end. And if we run out of time and don't get your question, we will definitely follow up afterwards. So please ask anything you'd like. Your voice will be heard. And we have a survey question at the end. It's more of a question for you about whether you'd like to get more information after you've heard us speak for the next hour or so. So let us know at that time if you'd like to get some more info, and we'll be certain to follow up as well with that. So with that, I will be back a little bit later to run the Q&A, but in the interim, I would like to pass things over to Brian. Brian, you've got the floor.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. My name is Brian Walter, and as Mike had indicated, I am the Global Industry Lead for Banking and Financial Markets. I've been with the Watson Group since we've stood the organization up in 2014 as a unit inside of IBM, and I'm joined today by Jonathan Young. What we will do with you today is provide some insights into Watson and the role of cognitive computing in banking and financial markets. We'll share some high-level trends that should not be too much of a surprise to folks that are in the industry that follow this space. I'll look at a little bit of the pressures and the forces that are at play, and really how this is forcing an industry that traditionally doesn't like change to really have to face up and embrace change. As Mike had indicated, we welcome questions, and we'll get to as many at the end of our discussion as we are able to. Throughout, we'll provide some examples and give you some visuals on some applications that we have with Watson in this space. So the first point I want to cover is the rapid change that we're seeing in the financial services industry. Again, there are four core themes. One is regulation, and this is something that continues to increase both in volume and in complexity, as well as the amount of resources that it takes organizations to follow, address, and comply and remediate. We do not see this trend diminishing anytime soon. We do see cognitive playing a role in this space and in helping firms get their arms around the challenges there. Digital disruption is something that we now have to live with, as a matter of fact, on a daily basis. There are new entrants into the industry. There are firms that are changing models, that are going after and chipping away at other firms and businesses within the industry, and that will continue to progress. In the area of wealth advice, we have, particularly in the United States, a population that's aging out from an advisor perspective. That is exacerbated by the lack of new advisors coming in to backfill those, and it is becoming more and more relevant given the types of advice and the amount of advice that's being sought by individuals across generations through a variety of devices. And lastly is the shift that we've seen in this space from what has been traditionally more of a product push, product focus, to a goals-based or relationship-based model. So a need to not only reapproach the business, but to retool the business as we see it today. In addition to that, we're seeing a perfect storm of factors coming together. The amount of data that is being created now through the Internet of Things and through our ability to collect more data as an industry is unprecedented. The commoditization of compute power is making it possible for, again, new entrants and new models to arise. The adoption of smart and mobile devices, I would almost change this to the domination of smart and mobile devices, and we're seeing that become more and more the norm as each day passes. And then the low satisfaction levels with the traditional service methodologies and service lines. And when you bring these together, they really are creating both a perfect storm of challenges for organizations and a very fertile playing field for disruptors. If we look at this visual here, what I find particularly interesting is, with the exception of a handful of years ago, these firms did not exist, and they are now dominant players in each of their spaces. And they haven't had to create a fleet of vehicles or build a portfolio of properties or acquire massive amounts of inventory to dominate a space, right? And they're doing it through use of technology, through better use of data that they have, and creating a great user experience. When we look at the financial services space, it's not a question of whether this is going to happen to this space. It's a question of when and to what degree. And as we look a little closer at this space, we see that there's quite a bit of disruption underway across many topical areas in the financial services sector. And this slide is not exhaustive by any means, but it is fairly indicative. And as we look at this, there are a few set of themes that really bubble to the surface. One is technology, so it's smart use of technology. Second is user experience, and can't overstate this enough. User experience is very, very important element in these plays, and important in plays that happen within organizations as we stand up new applications and new capabilities. Convenience and efficiency are definitely important, and these folks are looking at and taking advantage of the generational shift, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in our discussion. These are firms that traditional firms are either going to have to figure out a way to combat or figure out a way to fold into their value chain to their customer. But nonetheless, they are going to be disruptive, and they are going to force firms to look at how their business model is going to have to change going forward. So as we talk today, these are kind of the core themes or the core backdrops that we're seeing in the space. We will give you some examples of how folks are using cognitive in the backdrop of these factors, and some of the more creative thinking in this space and how it's being applied. So with that, I'm going to turn the discussion over to my colleague Jonathan and let him share with you some examples that that he is seeing and working with in the retail banking space. Jonathan?
Great. Thank you, Brian. And like Brian, I also have been with the Watson Group since we first inaugurated it as a business unit about a year and a half ago. So we've been there since the beginnings, and it's been a pretty exciting ride. So Brian has given you there a pretty good introduction to some of these key themes. I'm just going to pick up on some of those themes. So I'm going to talk about it across a couple of dimensions, really, particularly within a retail banking context. And I'm going to talk specifically about the impact of cognitive computing on the way that we can engage with our customers, or that banks can engage with customers. But at this point, I just want to introduce Watson, what Watson is, and to put that into a little bit of context too. So we talk about Watson as creating a new partnership between people and computers, and one that enhances and scales and accelerates human expertise. So Watson really is a portfolio of technologies that are all to do with cognitive computing. Some people refer to artificial intelligence, which is a kind of a related and overlapping field. And this portfolio of technologies is going to have a very significant impact in this industry and beyond. In fact, we think the impact is so significant that we talk about Watson and cognitive computing generally as starting a third era of computing. So if you think back, well, cast your mind back over 100 years, in fact, to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when IBM was still in its infancy, and at that time we were called something different. We were called a computing, tabulating, and recording company. But it was at that era that we entered the first era of computing, so the tabulating systems era. So at this stage, computers were sort of punch card machines, really, and that was pretty archaic by modern standards, but it was a fairly successful model in that it went on for some decades. And that brought us through to the 50s, where we entered the programmable systems era, where computers and machines were the earliest ancestors to the machines which we know of today. And that era is still with us. So the descendants of those early programmable systems computers are still with us every day, and we're probably using one, each of us, right this moment, and it's not going away anytime soon. But nevertheless, we think we're at the very early stages of this third era of computing, the era of cognitive computing, that probably started, we think, in 2011, when Watson, as some of you may know, entered as a contestant on the Jeopardy game show, and I'm glad to say won. So that's how Watson started, by winning a game show, but we've come a pretty long way since then. So let me talk a little bit about how Watson can play a role around customer engagement, specifically within retail banking. So I want to start with this quote, because I think it's a very interesting one, and it picks up on the themes that Brian mentioned here. So Gartner said that by the end of next year, almost 90% of companies, so almost all companies really, expect to compete mostly on the basis of customer experience. So that's a pretty bold claim, but I think intuitively it feels right. And I think to an extent that's true of banking too. Clearly this is a cross-industry statement, but I think customer experience is very important within financial services too. So the question is, why is that so important all of a sudden? I think there's a few reasons for that, but one of the key reasons is that the very nature of the customer has changed, I think, forever. Across a number of dimensions, really. Firstly, customers' expectations are really higher than they ever have been. The bar has been set extremely high by some of the day-to-day experiences the customers have when they engage with firms like Apple and Amazon and some of the other ones that Brian had on the chart earlier. So it's key that the experience that you offer your customers needs to be as seamless, as easy to use, as interesting, as beautifully well designed as those very high-end consumer experiences that they have every single day are. Anything that doesn't meet that bar is really destined ultimately, I think, to failure. So user experience and design-led thinking suddenly becomes much more important than it ever has been. And also things like interacting not just through traditional means on your computer, but using your voice and more natural sort of interaction than before is becoming increasingly important as customers' expectations of using things like Siri, for example, are becoming more commonplace. Customers are also more connected and more opinionated than they ever have been, and that's largely because of social media and social networking. So People obviously are much, much more connected through technology than they have been previously, and that's both good news and bad news. So if people have a good experience of your brand, then they can tell their friends and their friends' friends through the power of social networks incredibly easily, but similarly, they can also do that with a bad experience, and they do. So one of the most challenging things is to put customer service onto a Facebook page, because it really gives people a very public place to really rant and rage about poor customer experience. That's a risky thing to do, but that's the modern world in which we live. Loyalty and advocacy sort of comes out of that, really. We know, of course, intuitively that it's very important to build loyal customers. Now, banking is a particularly sticky industry, but that's becoming perhaps less the case as it becomes easier to move a bank account from one bank to another. But nevertheless, loyalty continues to be important. It's clearly easier to build a loyal and cheaper to build a loyal customer than it is to gain new customers. However, advocacy is really where the new battleground is. So it's not enough to build loyal customers. What really we should be doing is to build customer advocates because of the power of that social network. So customer experience, offering a great customer experience and great customer service is more important than it ever has been before. In fact, it's pretty much essential to do to stay in business. So it's on this basis that we see Watson playing an absolutely critical role. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Watson for customer engagement, particularly within the retail banking space. Now, you can look at Watson in a number of different ways, but here's one way to think about the role that Watson can play in a retail bank as your newest employee. Now, customer service is obviously experienced through a number of different dimensions, but it's certainly experienced through your people, through the staff that you have in your branch, through the staff that man your call centers, the contact centers. We see Watson is really playing a role to accompany your existing staff members across those different aspects. And the reason why we think Watson can be particularly effective in this space is the following. So if you imagine Watson as being a cognitive digital agent, if you like, a virtual agent, which is able to engage with your customers, to allow them to ask questions and to give them the answers they need, to help them walk through various business processes and so forth, then Watson can sort of become your first line of customer service, the first place that a customer would go to potentially if they had some sort of issue. That doesn't always need to be the case, but that's perhaps the most easy way to think about it. Now, if you implement Watson and a digital agent in that respect as your first customer touch point, then if Watson is able to answer, let's say, 80% of the customer's queries and questions that it receives, then we're able to minimize the number of times that those questions get deflected on to your human staff members, your call center agents, the people in the branches, and so forth. And that really minimizes call deflections. It optimizes what we call first contact resolution. And there's obviously a huge cost reduction there potentially, and also a much better experience for the customer, because their question can be answered pretty much instantaneously. There's no waiting in a call center queue, for example, or no bother having to walk down to the branch to sort something out. It can be answered quickly and easily from the platform that they're choosing, from the device that they're choosing. And it's only when things get very difficult for the system to answer that those questions need to be deflected to a person. And that means that the live agent, let's say the level 1 support agent in your call center, that means that the queries that they have to deal with are the more sophisticated ones. It means that they don't need to deal with the basic questions that get asked time and time and time again, sort of questions that really human beings shouldn't have to be dealing with. An automated system like Watson can deal with those. So our live agents there are freed up to deal with these more sophisticated questions, and also they have much more time in order to deal with them. So Watson for engagement, is what we like to term a state-of-the-art virtual assistant or digital assistant. It has a number of different functionalities. It allows a very natural English language interaction with the customer. It allows the customer to ask a question of it, and it's able to very efficiently to answer that. Also, it's able to indulge in a little bit of chit-chat, a little bit of personality. It can go further than that. It can go further than just answering questions, but it can also handhold the customer through business processes, common business processes, the sorts of ones, for example, I'm thinking of a credit card application process or the process to reset a password, the sorts of things that right now might be implemented on your website, perhaps buried in there underneath a web form, not particularly user-friendly. Well, the system here, and I'll show you an example of this, can walk you through that and make it as painless as possible. Some new functionality coming into the system is the fact that Watson is able to detect emotional states and therefore to respond in an appropriate way, because if somebody is angry when they ask you a question, perhaps they have a particularly poor experience in the branch, for example, then of course you need to respond to them appropriately in a very different way when the customer might be enthusiastic or happy. It's always a difficult thing for a machine to do, but we're introducing new capabilities to allow us to temper the response of Watson depending on the emotional state of the customer. We alluded to this already, but Watson is very much cross-platform. All customers currently use mobile devices, and of course they use the web experience as well within a browser. And obviously Watson, as you would expect, is 100% cross-platform mobile and across the web too. I think that's the cost of being in business. No more than that, but nevertheless I wanted to point it out. But more importantly than that, I think more excitingly than that, there are new channels coming online. So pretty soon, mobile channel is going to look pretty old-fashioned as we start to see some new exciting channels, things like robots and holograms, which we're already seeing used in some clients and in some countries. Japan obviously is usually ahead of the United States and the rest of the world in picking up some of these technologies, and they are already using robots in bank branches. So we have a relationship with leading robotics manufacturers, and we've developed Robot SDK, software development kit, to allow developers to access Watson as the sort of brains, if you like, behind the robotic platform. So you can start to interface and have a conversation with Watson, not just on your mobile phone, but also with a robot, where a robot is a logical device where you need a physical manifestation of the system, let's say in a branch. And then Watson finally has some very advanced machine learning capabilities. So one of the key components of the system is getting better over the time. Behind Watson are many hundreds of very advanced algorithms, which we're adding to almost daily and making them more and more sophisticated, making the system and the portfolio as a whole perhaps the most advanced one that there is. So as a quick backdrop, that's the space that we're in and a little bit about Watson. But rather than use more charts to explain this, let me just show you how this would look in a demonstration. Typically, I would put out my mobile phone right now and I'd show you live a running instance of Watson on my mobile phone. But because of the limitations of doing this in a webinar, I'm just going to have to use some screenshots of my mobile phone to try and bring this to life. So excuse me if this is a little bit clunkier than I'd like it to be, but nevertheless, these are screenshots of a live system, so I've cheated as little as I can. So imagine that I'm a customer of this fictitious bank called Personal Choice, and I've had on my mobile phone a pop-up warning me of a suspicious transaction. So that's worried me, of course. I pulled out my mobile phone and I've opened the app on my iPhone there, which you can see in front of you, for Personal Choice Bank. And I can see that those are my two accounts, my current or checking account and my savings or deposit account. And I can see that my checking account has gone into the red. I seem to be overdrawn, which is a concern. So I click on that, and once I do that, I can see that there's a number of transactions there which I'm a little bit worried about and I don't necessarily recognize. So what I'm able to do is click on the little button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen where it says Watson and pull up this instance of Watson. And Watson pops up and says, "Hello, I'm Watson. I'm the virtual assistant. What can I do to help you today?" As you can see, this is a great way of integrating this Watson capability into an existing application on a mobile phone. It doesn't need to be a standalone instance, nor do I need to pick up the phone to the call center or go into the branch. I can do this all within the instance of the app on my phone, and I think that's a much better way of doing things. So it allows me to answer the question in natural language, and I can say pretty much whatever I want, and with any luck, the system will be able to answer me. So I say, hello there, I've received an alert about a suspicious transaction, and Watson agrees with me and says that I can see a charge which has been flagged up. This is a transaction that I recognize, and it's doing this by integrating with the bank's back office systems, in this case, fraud systems. So I don't recognize that transaction, which is a slight concern. So I say no, and the system says, don't worry, I can help you to fix this, and do you recognize this other transaction from earlier today? And rather worryingly, there's a $600 charge there for some lingerie, which, believe you me, is absolutely nothing to do with me. Fortunately, I'm speaking to a machine, so there's no need to be embarrassed. So I say, no, I don't. And Watson agrees that there's been some fraudulent activity on my account, and let's work together to sort this out. So you can see, by the way, that it's calling me by my name because I've logged in to the app using my usual user credentials. So there's a certain amount of personalization that can happen there. So that's great. So I say I don't recognize that, and yes, I'd like to get that sorted out. Watson says the first thing we need to do is to cancel your card. Let's do that now. It's okay. I suppose it is. Obviously, it's a bit of a pain, but yes, I suppose so. But Watson wants to try and make this as painless for me as possible. So Watson says, okay, we can get that sorted out, and it's probably a good idea to reset the online banking password right now. Should we do that right now? I should say, by the way, that you're seeing this in text, and obviously I'm having to read it out to you, but if you were doing this live, that I could be speaking using my voice, there's voice input into my phone, and similarly, Watson could speak this back to me using text-to-speech functionality. So we can be literally speaking to each other. We don't need to type this out if we don't need to. That's optional, but it's quite a neat thing to be able to do. So let's try and get these security issues sorted out and try and get my online banking password reset. It asks me some security questions, the name of my first pet. It says let's enter a new password, and I put in the password of Singapore because the last time I did this demo was at Cybos in Singapore. And then Watson says, okay, great, I've reset your password and I'm emailing you a new one for your records. And I thank the system for that. So that's all done. And then Watson says, okay, let's get your new card sorted out now. I can mail one to you, or if you prefer, you can come into your nearest branch to get a replacement straight away. Now I wanted to get a new card right now. So I say, I really need it today. Can I come and get it to the branch? So you can do all sorts of interesting little value-adding activities within the instance of the application here. So one of the ones is, Watson says here, which branch would you like to collect the cards from? Would you like me to show you where the nearest one is? So we can simply integrate in with a map application and show me how to get from where I am right now using, obviously, location tracking services, which are embedded in the phone already, to the location of the branch. So that looks good. That's very helpful. So I say, okay, let's take me to the nearest one. Thank you. In Orchard Road. Watson confirms that Orchard Road is a good location, and that Watson would kind of phone ahead, if you like, to the branch and have that card ready for me when I get there. So Watson says, please show this QR code to me when you arrive. So that is slightly unusual. There's a QR code, which allows me to identify myself to the system when I get into the branch. And I say, so, okay, fine, but you'll be there, will you, in person, Watson? It seems odd. I thought I was talking to a machine. And Watson makes a little joke and says, sure, I'll be wearing a carnation so that you can recognize me when you get there. So, we can inject a little bit of personality in this. We can have a little bit of fun. And it always goes well with customers when we do that. Now, the reason why Watson is saying that I want to meet you in the branch when we get there is that we can have a seamless handoff from the mobile app here, which we've been working with, to something like a robot in the branch. Now, typically, again, if I was doing this to you live in a presentation environment, we do have these robots. You can see a picture of me talking to one of these robots. Here, we do have these robots, and at the back end of the robot, it again is the same instance of Watson. So we're able to have a natural language conversation with the robot and pick up this conversation in person, which I think is fantastic. So Watson, in the guise of the robot now, can say, good to see you again, Jonathan. I remember the conversation we had previously. I've got that card ready for you. Please go and collect it from counter number 3, and we're good to go. So it's some very significant automation of business process and customer service going on here, both across mobile applications, but also on a robot device in the branch, should you want to take it that far. And I think we're starting to see customers very interested in that right now. So that was a quick whistle-stop tour of what that might look at. Let me talk very briefly about what's going on behind the technology there, if you like. So let's just talk a little bit about what it means for a computer like Watson, a system, to have a conversation with a human being. So when I ask a question, let's say in this instance the question is, I'm frustrated, I haven't been able to log into your bidding system. That is a very difficult thing for any machine to break down and make sense of. For one thing, there are many, many ways to ask the same question. So that question, I'm frustrated, I haven't been able to log into your bidding system, could mean the same as, I forgot my password, how do I get a new password, I can't log into your site, etc., etc., etc. There's 100, there's 1,000 different ways of asking the same question. So how does the machine cope with that? There's a concept here called intent. The intent behind that question is the same as it is for all of those different questions that mean fundamentally the same thing. The intent is password reset. So we use very sophisticated techniques to classify those questions into one single class or intent, in this instance called password reset. And we use these deep learning techniques to derive that intent. The way that we're able to do that is that Watson actually has read Wikipedia, and that's given it an understanding of language and the concepts of language, idiom, grammar and syntax and so forth. So it's able to try and understand new versions, new alternatives of this question as they come in. And it gets better over time. It's not perfect to start off with, but it gets better over time. That's important because actually when you start to think about questions as intents, then actually there are a relatively small number of intents that get asked. So really it's in probably the hundreds rather than the many, many thousands, I think. So the sorts of questions that customers have boil down to just a relatively small number of intents. And as soon as we can figure that out, then we can build a system around that to handle those intents, at least 80% of the time. So that all falls into the short tail in this distribution of questions chart that you see in front of you here. But what happens when a question falls outside of the 80% of questions and falls into that long tail? So these are very obscure questions that probably never come up ever again. Well, you can do a number of things. You can either hand off to a live agent. That's a very sensible thing to do. Let them deal with the more sophisticated and obscure questions. Or we have other elements in the Watson portfolio that can have a good go at answering those questions. They're not going to be potentially quite as accurate as the previous stuff that we've just been talking about, but nevertheless, it's still capable of automating that too. So there's any number of different ways that you can handle this, but the most important thing to take away here is the 80% of questions that come are commonly and repeatedly asked by customers time and time again, but they ask them in lots and lots of different ways. We have ways of addressing that, and that's really the key behind allowing a system to engage with the customer naturally. Okay, that was a very quick whistle-stop tour around how Watson can work with customers in a retail banking context. I want to hand it over now back to Brian, who's going to talk about customer engagement again, but from a very different perspective, which is the perspective of the wealth management space, private banking and high net worth clients. So, Brian, let me hand back to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So as we look at the area of wealth management, I just want to bring this back and remind us of a couple of things, right? We're talking about a different computing platform, cognitive platform. It's not a computer that you program when we traditionally think about computers. It's a system that you work with and you teach and learn, just as we have as individuals. The same approach and process goes into Watson. So Watson learns terms, Watson learns concepts, Watson scales expertise, and that's what makes this very unique and very different from an approach perspective, and that's where we feel it definitely is transformative and is a game changer. And as we look at the area of wealth and we look at cognitive, there's a few themes that have come to the forefront with our clients. Number one is data, right? And I'm sure we're all tuned into the explosiveness of data that's out there. But I heard a statistic the other day that I thought was pretty relevant. someone had said that the amount of data that we now produce on a annual basis is such that we could deliver 340 newspapers to every man, woman, and child on the planet every single day. Essentially what we're saying is that we're producing more data than we have the ability to consume or make sense of, and in there we're burying the information. And 80% of that data that gets produced is invisible to today's computers. It's what's called unstructured data. We call it dark data. We have other names for it. But it's the things that we as human beings can understand and can make sense of because we have a linguistical understanding. But traditional computers can't. They can move that information around, which can either be text or visual or audio and so on, but that's about the extent of it. Cognitive systems like Watson has the ability to understand that data, has the ability to reason, to learn what's in that data, and thus extract out the information. Why is that important? It's important because the prevalence of data is going to continue. The accessibility of it is going to broaden, and the need to extract actionable insights out of that for firms to compete and to create that experience that Jonathan talked about is essential. And the only way to do that is to do that with cognitive systems. And firms that are doing that are going to have a considerable advantage over firms that are not doing that. And there's a lot at stake, particularly when we look at the area of wealth management. When we start to talk about how do we serve the client, how do we serve the client against this backdrop of technology, of disruptors, of the tsunami of data that continues to flow, and how do we do it multi-generational? Right? So firms that we work with, they're very tuned into the $40+ trillion wealth transfer that's underway from the baby boomer generation. What they're struggling with is what does that mean? How do we focus and serve other clients? How do we service our female population, which there's a 70% chance that my female client is going to leave when money moves to her. They've got a longer life expectancy, so I need to figure out how to have a relationship with that segment that I don't have today. How do I serve the millennials, which very shortly are going to eclipse boomers from a spending perspective. That'll happen sometime in 2018, and are now moving to money, and money will be moving to them. They have a whole different set of expectations from a service perspective. In fact, majority of them would rather interact with technology more than individuals. It doesn't mean that individuals do not have a role to play, but the shift in the balance in that role is changing. How do we establish a relationship across generations? What are the actions? What are the service levels? What are the capabilities that we need to provide? Getting this right is essential for a number of firms. It's going to be essential for their existence. A lot of the startups and the robo-advisors that we see in this space are focused in taking as much market share here as possible. Arguably, they've got a very small share today, but if they get it right and they bring to market scale from the human and user experience, they bring to market a 24/7 capability so that individuals can get access to the information that they need when they need it, they're going to win over relationships, and they're going to win over clients, and they're going to begin to not only disrupt a business that is ripe for disruption, they're going to begin to take large market share. Now, traditional firms are not asleep at the wheel. Most every firm out there in the street that I work with has some sort of initiative underway to try and figure out not only how to deal with the multi-generational aspect of financial advice and wealth management, but to deal with the space that's often referred to as robo-advisors. There's one area I want to take and key in on with the remaining time, and that's when we look at this space of wealth management, we look at the space of bringing scale to the advisor and going direct to the consumer or the client. What's the service look like? What's the experience feel like? So I want to share with you, much like Jonathan did, an example of how we're doing that. We're doing that with a firm that is a member of the Watson ecosystem. So we have a system of partners that we work closely with to take what we think are industry-leading capabilities and integrate cognitive capabilities with those organizations. So Marstone is one of our ecosystem partners. They are what one would think of as a traditional robo-advisor, would be the category they put them in. What they bring is, again, a nice use of technology combined with user experience to deliver productivity at the enterprise level or at the wealth manager level. They are able to deliver advice and planning tools direct to the individual or in conjunction with the advisor. Adding Watson to that, what we're bringing to the equation is the human experience. So the ability to, first of all, have a deep understanding of an interaction, rather than having a basic digital interaction, which is typically service-oriented, transaction-oriented, and delivering information. We're making it conversational. We're making it informative. We are providing personalization on a precision or individual level, and we're acting and reacting with the individuals based on their preferences, based on their personalities, based on what we are learning about them through applying cognitive. And between the two firms, we're delivering what we feel to be really a truly bionic experience for the users. So as you look at the screen that is in front of you now, right, you'll see something that is very graphical. You'll see something that is making the interaction more about the individuals and less about numbers. As a society, we're not very, very comfortable with the language of finance, so we're working at ways to have that type of an interaction, have that type of conversation, but do it in a very user-friendly way and extend that not just through money management, but through financial planning and through day-to-day interactions. In here, we'll see we've got Watson at work within the Marstone platform, and what we're delivering here is a few things. From a client perspective, we're providing access to information, access to services on a 24/7 basis, and bringing the expertise of the advisor to the forefront. And what we're not doing is replacing the advisor, but what we are doing is that we are delivering those high-value interactions at the client level when the client needs them. We are offlaying the lower-value interactions that the advisor typically would do into the Bionic system or into the Marstone system, so that the advisor is left with much higher-value interactions on a client-by-client basis. This gives them scale. This gives them value. This lets them focus on the relationship and lets them deliver more of a goals-based relationship model. It also opens up a conversation to other constituents within the immediate client base and outside the client base. So it allows them to not just have the interactions with the patriarch or the matriarch, but the children and their siblings and other folks that money is going to move to when money passes through the wealth transfer. It also gives them the ability to open up a channel of communication to people that have yet to come into enough money to hire an advisor full-time and pay the fees, but know that that's going to happen, so it provides scale to the up-and-coming mass affluent, right? Folks that typically are going to be millennials that are going to be more comfortable with technology anyway, and begin to institutionalize that relationship and start that conversation and maintain it in a very active way. So in here we're seeing Watson interacting in the context of the application, right? It's aware of what's going on from a contextual perspective with the individual, much like Jonathan just demonstrated. We're seeing here Watson having a conversation with the individual. In this instance, it's Jan. It's informing her of services that she was not aware of that would be available to her. It's making an offer to her based on what the firm would like to see done, much like a good advisor would do. And it's there to answer questions. It's not intrusive. It's not something that Jan is having to dig to. It's something that she can have a conversation with. All the while, we're applying cognitive analytics. Again, our ability to understand the language of the communication, understand what's going on, to help us better understand the client, to provide information that will help drive the relationship at the advisor-client level, as well as at the institutional level. The other thing that we're looking to do is to really, again, drive the experience. So encourage people to think about their money more in terms of life goals and in terms of aspirations and life events, rather than how much money do I need to save if I want to retire by date certain. There's a lot more that goes into the equation and into the conversation. Therefore, combining a rich visual environment with cognition and in conversation and cognitive analytics, we're able to help people plan for and have a much more active dialogue, first and foremost with their money, secondly with their institutions. Whether they have all of their investments in one place or not, we're able to provide that holistic view and that holistic conversation. And the goal over time, obviously, for the firm is to move more of that money into the firm, but at the very least drive that relationship and build out opportunities to better serve and to better cross-sell and to better work with that client. The last piece here, example that we have, is also taking cognitive and not only being aware of interactions that are taking place on the glass or at that moment in time, but around an individual's events and life events. And here we've got Watson picking up on an activity that Jen kicked off inside the system that indicated that it's quite possible that they are going to have a child. Right? And Watson very tactfully approaches this subject and has a conversation with Jan about it, and has so in a manner that it brings value to her. It continues to educate her, behaves much like a good advisor would, and is able to, again, deliver a better experience, help an individual in their interactions with goals-based planning, financial planning, management of money, management of life events, and do it in a manner that is much more Apple-esque, if you will, rather than looking at spreadsheets, looking at pie charts, trying to figure out what I should do with what money to get what kind of a yield. Again, we see this as not replacing a financial advisor. We see it as extending the capabilities of an advisor, delivering it 24/7 through Watson and through cognitive capabilities, bringing that human level of the interaction to bear, meaning, the understanding of the data exchanges, the understanding of the context. We're combining it with internal information and external information, so we can pull in news sources, pull in social media, and enrich and enhance the conversation, again, much as a good advisor would do. We think this is a very good use of cognitive capabilities. We see it as something that answers the disruption of what robos are bringing to the traditional financial planning space by making it bionic and extending the capabilities of an advisor. But we also see it as a way to deliver higher value interactions to clients when they need it, on the terms that they need it, right, and providing them the actionable insights that they need to manage their lives and manage the finances within their lives. Mike, I think we're pretty much running down to the question and answer period. I will leave the folks with this. If you've got questions or follow-up, my contact information is at the back of this deck. If you'd like to read up a little bit more about what we're doing in the space of financial management, wealth management, there's a couple of white papers that you can go and read and download. So with that, Mike, I'm going to turn it back to you for questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Really fascinating stuff, and we've got some good questions coming in. I know we've got our time is running short, so let me just jump right to them. The first question I will ask, and let me direct this to Jonathan. How will the call center experience using Watson feel different to customers than the voice recognizing systems we use today?
Yeah, good question. It rather depends. What different customers are looking at this differently, and some of them are very wedded to what they call IVR system, integrated voice recognition systems. But I don't know about you, but I certainly find those systems incredibly frustrating, and some of them are better than others. So in my perfect world, I would see Watson as being the front line of defense, if you like. So it kind of replacing those voice recognition systems, allowing you to engage with Watson using natural language in a very natural back and forth way, to ask a question initially, and hopefully Watson can answer it. If not, it gets deflected to a live agent. But it will be directed to a live agent based on some intelligent routing work that we can do in order to make sure that it's delivering your question, your query to the appropriate agent. Now, right now, as you know, when you encounter one of these IVR systems, when you're in line for a call center, you have to press 1 for this and 2 for that, and it's very frustrating. And you still have to wait in line for hours, and it's far, far, far from perfect. And I think that sort of an experience is absolutely ripe for disruption. That must get better, and we have some technology. I think potentially working hand in hand actually with some of the more established call center technology providers, we have some partnerships there, potentially working hand in hand with them to do that, to give a much, much better customer experience in that space.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. And let's see here. Next question. Let me direct this one to Brian. In the Marstone example, is it clear to customers that they're talking to a computer when they engage with Ask Watson?
So yes, that's clearly up to the institution that is using the platform, but we our bias is sure make it clear.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's see here. Next one for Jonathan. Does this technology put people out of work?
Again, good question. And my answer to that is no, I don't think so. Clearly, it's down to the customer that buys it to deploy it in the way that they feel fit. But advanced as Watson is, and it is very advanced, it is very sophisticated, it's not a human being. We're not pretending that it is as sophisticated as a human being. So there is still very much a role, I'm glad to say, for human beings in the workplace. What we see that Watson is playing is a role which is very much supportive to live agents, live staff, real human beings to support and enable them, and to allow human beings to focus on what they're good at, rather than have human beings waste their time on the repetitive, trivial nature of the questions that come up time and time again. But people shouldn't have to be dealing with that sort of dross. Let the automated system deal with the bulk of that, let the people focus on what they're good at, add value, allow them to sell, free them up to sell, give them more time by not making it easy for them not to focus on low value stuff, allow them, free them up to focus on more sophisticated, high value kind of questions and queries.
Understood. Good. Thank you. And here's a question. I think we've touched on this a little bit in the discussion, but let me just ask: how does Watson get trained? Jonathan, did you take that one?
Yeah. which is a difficult question to ask, actually, because Watson is more than one technology. It's a suite, it's a portfolio of technologies, and it rather depends on which bit we're talking about. But if we use the example that I was using, so customer engagement in a sort of consumer-facing environment, then it's a tricky thing to do to get a conversational system up to speed. Because as you can imagine, engaging in natural conversation between man and machine is no simple task. But we figured out over time that one of the really key and clever ways to go about handling that is to appreciate the fact that actually the bulk of questions that customers ask in a domain like retail banking are highly repetitive. They come up time and time again. So the key is to identify what those intents are, the intents that sit behind those repetitive questions that come up with time and time again. And then we build a model to recognize those intents and to recognize different iterations of questions that map to those intents as well. So we build a model, statistical model, if you like, an analytical model that's able to do that, and we train the model over time, and the model gets better and better and better and better and better. The good news is, of course, it's a machine. It never forgets. It doesn't take a holiday. It doesn't mind working weekends. It just gets better. It doesn't get worse. It won't quit. So that's very, very good news. One of the shortcuts to training a system like that is if you're already using, let's say, a live chat system on your website, and a lot of people do, it's quite effective, although, of course, there are people behind it manning that. And if you have logs from those live chat instances, then we've already got a log of the sorts of questions, and therefore we can get to the intents that customers are asking of your agents day in, day out. And then we can feed that into Watson and train the model using that sort of data. So that's one way. The answer is a lot broader than that, but that's one way we can get a system trained and up to speed quite quickly. And I think we're out of time, so I'll stop there.
Yes, we're just about the top of the hour here, and I'll just squeeze in one more quick question to Brian. What are some other ways people are using Watson?
So I'll list them off, and happy to go into them deeper with anyone else. Watson is being used as an expert assistant to financial advisors at the desktop. Regulatory and compliance is a very, very hot area for Watson. The ability to understand and manage the flow of regulatory change and policy. KYC, so the ability to truly understand and know an individual from a much wider set of data sources than traditionally are used at a much, much quicker pace. Because of Watson's ability to ingest and understand information and the connections within it. From a client prospecting perspective, which is the other side of KYC, the ability to know much more about individuals and prioritize them for a prospecting per point of view and exercise. And then the last is a large focus around equity research. Right, and the ability to do much deeper research, much more comprehensive research through applying Watson and cognitive capabilities at data collection and the understanding and analysis of underlying data.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. I think on that note, let's wrap things up. We always try to bring these things in on schedule as close as possible, respecting everyone's very, very busy schedules. And I'd like to, of course, thanks to Brian and Jonathan for a wonderful hour of discussion, really kind of fascinating insights, and judging by the questions we've got from the audience, also something that really struck a chord with everyone here. So, and thanks to the audience for being here. We would not want to do it without you, so thank you for sticking with us. You'll be getting an email from us in 24 to 48 hours with a link to the recording and the slides themselves. And also, if you want more information, please, when the survey prompts you, let us know, and Brian and Jonathan or one of their team will get in touch with you right away. So thanks so much. And with that, I'll wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.